a man reluctantly accepts a strange, scrappy foal as a gift, thinking it's nothing more than a horse he can't afford. But as the days go by, the foal begins to show traits that don't make sense, traits that seem to tie it to a powerful, hidden past. What secrets does this seemingly ordinary horse hold? And when the truth comes out, how will it change his life forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Jonah Harris's garage, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Grease-stained tools lay scattered around him as he hunched over the engine of an old Chevy, his weathered hands working methodically. Every few minutes he'd wipe his brow with his sleeve, leaving dark smudges on his forehead. Through the open garage door, he could see Ava at the kitchen table, her blonde head bent over her homework. The sight of her made his chest tight. A stack of unopened bills sat on his workbench, their red, past-due stamps, like accusatory eyes staring at him. "Just need to get this timing belt fixed," he muttered to himself, though fixing cars barely kept food on the table these days. The rumble of an approaching truck made him look up. His stomach dropped when he recognized the beaten-up Ford and the horse trailer it was pulling. Uncle Roy. They hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since that bitter argument about the family property. Roy's truck crunched to a stop in the gravel driveway. Ava appeared in the doorway, curiosity written across her face. "Stay inside, sweetie," Jonah called out, wiping his hands on a rag as he walked to meet his uncle. Roy, gray-haired and weather-beaten, didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Got something for you, Jonah." He moved to the trailer and unlatched the door. Inside stood a small, dirty foal. Her ribs showed through her dull coat, and her mane was tangled with burrs. But there was something in her eyes, a spark that made Jonah pause. "This here's your problem now," Roy said, already leading the foal down the ramp. "She's got champion bloodlines, but nobody wants her after that mess with her sire at the Derby." "Wait just a minute," Jonah protested, his voice rising. "I can't take care of a horse. I can barely—" He gestured helplessly at the bills on his workbench. "She's got potential. More than you know." Roy pressed the lead rope into Jonah's hands. "Consider it a gift." Without another word, he climbed back into his truck. "Roy, you can't just—" But his uncle was already pulling away, leaving Jonah standing there with the rope in his hands and the skinny foal watching him with wary eyes. "Oh, she's beautiful." Ava had slipped out of the house despite his warning. She approached slowly, her face glowing with wonder. The foal's ears pricked forward, and she stretched her neck toward Ava's outstretched hand. "We can't keep her," Jonah said firmly. "We'll find somewhere else for her in a few days." "Can we call her Whisper?" Ava was already stroking the foal's nose. "Look how quiet and gentle she is." Jonah ran a hand through his hair, leaving another grease stain. "Fine, Whisper, but just until we figure something out." He watched as the foal delicately nuzzled Ava's palm, and his daughter's face lit up with pure joy. The sight only made the weight in his chest heavier. Another mouth to feed, another responsibility he couldn't afford. Whisper nickered softly, pressing closer to Ava, who had already wrapped her arms around the foal's neck. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered, and Jonah felt his resolve crumbling even as resentment bubbled up inside him. The next morning, Jonah jolted awake to angry shouting from outside. His heart sank as he rushed to pull on his boots, already knowing something was wrong. Through the kitchen window, he spotted Whisper munching contentedly in old Mr. Peterson's wheat field, and Mr. Peterson himself storming up Jonah's driveway. "Harris!" Peterson's face was red with anger. "Your horse is destroying my crops!" Jonah hurried outside, the screen door banging behind him. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Peterson. I'll get her right now," He jogged toward the broken section of fence, where Whisper had clearly pushed through the rotting boards. "Sorry won't pay for the damage." Peterson followed close behind, jabbing his finger at the trampled wheat. "That's money out of my pocket, Harris, and I know you can't afford to make this right." Heat crept up Jonah's neck as he grabbed Whisper's lead rope. The foal came willingly enough, but the damage was done. At least 20 square feet of wheat lay flattened. "I'll figure something out," Jonah said through gritted teeth, leading Whisper back to his property. "Maybe I can help with your harvest, or—" "Just keep that animal contained," Peterson snapped, turning away. "One more incident like this, and I'm calling animal control." After securing Whisper to a post, Jonah spent the next 2 hours cobbling together repairs with whatever he could find. Old boards from behind the garage, rusty nails straightened with pliers, wire salvage from an old fence. His fingers ached from hammering, and sweat soaked through his shirt despite the morning chill. Ava came out to help, dragging her brush and curry comb. "I'll take care of her, Dad," she said, working the tangles from Whisper's mane. "See? She likes it when I brush her." Jonah paused his work, wiping his forehead. "Honey, it's not just about brushing her. She needs feed, vet care, proper fencing. Things we can't afford right now." He gestured at his makeshift repairs. "This won't hold forever." "But she's special." Ava's lower lip trembled. "I can feel it." "Ava," Jonah's voice softened. "We talked about this. She's only staying until we find somewhere else for her." Later that evening, Jonah stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes with mechanical movements. Through the window, he could see Ava in the paddock with Whisper. His daughter was teaching the foal to follow her in circles, both of them moving in perfect sync. Ava's laughter carried across the yard, bright and clear in the golden light. Something in his chest loosened at the sight. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen Ava so happy, so full of purpose. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine keeping Whisper, giving his daughter this one precious thing she wanted so badly. But then he thought of the bills on his workbench, of Peterson's angry face, of all the expenses a horse would bring. "Can't let myself get attached," he muttered, turning away from the window. "She's not staying. She can't." The screech of tires and blaring horns yanked Jonah from his sleep. His stomach dropped as he rushed to the window, already knowing what he'd find. There was Whisper, prancing in the middle of the road while cars swerved around her. "No, no, no!" He bolted outside in his pajamas, bare feet slapping against the cold ground. A red pickup truck had stopped sideways across both lanes, its driver gesturing wildly. "Get your horse off the road before someone gets killed," the driver shouted. Jonah grabbed Whisper's lead rope, which was still attached and dragging behind her. "I'm so sorry," he called out to the growing line of angry drivers. His cheeks burned as he led Whisper back to the paddock, where the gate hung open. Ava came running out in her nightgown, eyes wide with worry. "Is Whisper okay?" "The gate, Ava!" Jonah's voice came out sharper than he intended. "You promised to check it last night. Someone could have been hurt." "I did check it." Tears welled in Ava's eyes. "I double-checked, I swear." Jonah took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "Go get dressed for school. I'll deal with this." As he examined the gate's broken latch, movement caught his eye. Whisper was trotting along the fence line, her movements fluid and graceful despite her scraggly appearance. There was something about the way she moved, the proud arch of her neck, the powerful stride of her legs. Roy's words echoed in his mind. "That horse has potential, more than you know." Jonah shook his head, pushing the thought away. What potential? She was just a troublemaking foal who'd been dumped on him. "She's not being bad, Dad." Ava had returned, now dressed for school. "She's just curious. And look how fast she runs." They watched as Whisper broke into a canter, covering the length of the paddock in a few smooth strides. "Being curious isn't an excuse for being dangerous," Jonah said. But his voice had lost its edge. There was something compelling about watching Whisper move. That evening, after tucking Ava into bed, Jonah paused in the hallway. His daughter's voice drifted through the partially closed door. "Dear God," Ava whispered, "please let us keep Whisper. I promise I'll take better care of the gate, and I'll work really hard to help Dad with her. She makes me so happy. And I think she could make Dad happy too, if he'd just give her a chance." Jonah leaned against the wall, his chest tight. Through the window, he could see Whisper's pale form in the moonlight, standing quietly in her paddock. The same horse that had caused chaos this morning now looked almost regal, like she belonged there. Maybe there was something special about her. The way she moved, her fearless spirit, the light she brought to Ava's eyes, it all hinted at something more. But what? And could they really afford to find out? The morning sun beat down on Jonah as he leaned over the engine of Mrs. Peterson's old Buick. Sweat dripped from his forehead while he tightened a bolt, the metallic clink of his wrench mixing with Ava's laughter from the paddock. "Look at her go, Dad!" Ava called out. Jonah glanced up, about to remind Ava to keep her voice down, but the words died in his throat. Whisper was running laps around the paddock, her hooves barely seeming to touch the ground. Despite her thin frame, she moved with incredible grace and power, kicking up dust as she accelerated. Wiping his hands on a rag, Jonah stepped away from the car. He'd never really watched Whisper run before. He'd been too busy being annoyed by her presence. But now, he couldn't look away. The horse's muscles rippled beneath her coat as she maintained her impressive speed, lap after lap. "She's been running like this for 10 minutes straight," Ava said proudly. "She's not even tired." As if to prove Ava's point, Whisper showed no signs of slowing down. Her stamina was remarkable for such a young horse. Jonah found himself walking closer to the fence, studying her form with growing interest. A whinnying sound came from next door. The neighbor's prize quarter horse, Thunder, was trotting along his side of the fence. Whisper's ears perked up immediately. She changed course, running parallel to Thunder along the fence line. The bigger horse picked up speed, but Whisper matched him. Stride for stride. Then, with a burst of energy that seemed to come from nowhere, she surged ahead, easily outpacing Thunder despite her smaller size. "Did you see that?" Jonah muttered to himself. Something clicked in his mind, Roy's cryptic comments about Whisper's potential, her natural speed and stamina, the way she seemed born to run. Later that night, after Ava had gone to bed, Jonah sat at his computer, typing frantically. Article after article filled his screen, telling the story of Storm's legacy, a champion racehorse whose career ended in scandal. The resemblance between Storm's legacy and Whisper was unmistakable. The same proud bearing, the same fluid grace. His heart raced as he read about the doping allegations that had destroyed Storm's legacy's reputation. The champion horse had disappeared from the racing world, but not before siring one last foal. The dates matched perfectly with Whisper's age. Through the window, Jonah could see Ava in the paddock, having snuck out to visit Whisper one last time before bed. She stood on her tiptoes, arms wrapped around Whisper's neck, whispering into her ear. The moonlight cast a silver glow over them both as Ava shared her secret dreams of racing glory, unaware that her father might be starting to share those dreams too. Jonah looked from the computer screen to the paddock and back again. Could Whisper be more than just an unwanted burden? Could she be their chance at something extraordinary? The sun was just peeking over the horizon when Jonah shook Ava awake. "Get dressed," he whispered. "We're taking Whisper out." Ava rubbed her eyes, confused but excited. "Really? Before breakfast?" 10 minutes later, they were leading Whisper across the dewy grass at Thompson's abandoned field. The morning air was crisp, and mist clung to the ground in wispy patches. Whisper's ears twitched with curiosity as she explored this new territory. "What are we doing here, Dad?" Ava asked, watching her father place old paint buckets at regular intervals around the field. "Just want to see something," Jonah replied, keeping his voice casual despite the anticipation building in his chest. He finished marking out a rough oval track about a quarter-mile long. Whisper pawed at the ground, her muscles tense with energy. Jonah positioned her at what he designated as the starting point, then walked about 20 yards ahead. "Stay with her, Ava," he called out. Taking a deep breath, Jonah clapped his hands sharply. "Come on, girl," he shouted. Whisper's head came up, but she stayed put, confused by this new game. Jonah clapped again, louder this time. "Come on, Whisper! Run!" The young horse glanced at Ava, who gave her an encouraging pat. When Jonah clapped a third time, something clicked. Whisper's body coiled like a spring, and then she exploded forward. The force of her acceleration left Ava gasping. Whisper flew across the field, her hooves barely touching the ground as she followed the path of buckets. Her speed was breathtaking. Even without proper training, she moved like lightning over the uneven ground. "Look at her go!" Ava squealed, jumping up and down. "She's amazing!" Jonah stood very still, his heart pounding. He'd seen racehorses before, but never had he witnessed such raw, natural talent. Whisper rounded the final turn and galloped back to them, barely winded from her run. On the walk home, Jonah's mind was racing faster than Whisper had been. He mentally added up figures: entry fees for small local races, basic training equipment, proper feed. It would be tight, maybe impossible, but... At the kitchen table, Ava hunched over her sketchbook, her tongue poking out in concentration. Her crayon moved quickly across the paper, drawing Whisper with a big gold trophy beside her. She'd added a blue ribbon and lots of stars, her childish artwork full of hope and possibility. Jonah watched her draw, his careful calculations warring with the warm feeling spreading through his chest. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected gift from Roy wasn't such a burden after all. Jonah's fingers moved across his laptop keyboard, searching through local equestrian websites. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as he scrolled past professional races and fancy competitions, looking for something more basic. His coffee grew cold beside him, forgotten in his focused search. Finally, he found it. The Cedar Valley Amateur Race Series. It was perfect. Small entry fee, modest cash prize, and open to newcomers. Best of all, it was happening in just 3 weeks at the county fairgrounds. Jonah jotted down the details, his pen hesitating over the entry fee amount. Meanwhile, at Riverside Elementary, Ava sat cross-legged with her friends during recess. "She's super fast," she told them, her eyes shining. "Yesterday, Dad took us to the big field, and Whisper ran like the wind. I bet she could beat any horse in town." After school, Jonah picked up Ava in his old truck. Instead of heading straight home, he pulled into the parking lot of Miller's feed store. The bell jingled as they entered, and the smell of hay and grain filled the air. "Can I help you folks?" asked the clerk, a weathered man in a dusty baseball cap. Jonah cleared his throat. "Need some proper horse feed, and maybe some grooming supplies." As the clerk gathered their items, Jonah winced at the growing total. Each brush, each bag of feed represented another bill he'd have to juggle. But when he glanced at Ava carefully selecting a bright blue curry comb, he couldn't bring himself to put anything back. That evening after dinner, Jonah and Ava stood by the paddock fence. Whisper grazed peacefully in the last rays of sunlight, her coat already looking better after just a few weeks of regular meals. "Ava," Jonah said, trying to keep his voice neutral, "I found a small race happening soon. Thought maybe we could enter Whisper, just to see what she can do." Ava's eyes grew wide. "A real race? With other horses and everything?" "Now don't get too excited," Jonah cautioned. "It's just a test run, nothing fancy. But if you're willing to help train her—" "I'll help every single day," Ava promised, bouncing on her toes. "We'll brush her and exercise her and practice running and—" "Whoa there," Jonah laughed, holding up his hands. "One step at a time." As Ava chattered excitedly about her plans, Jonah watched Whisper lift her head, her ears perked forward attentively. The setting sun caught her profile, highlighting her strong legs and proud bearing. Despite his best efforts to remain practical, Jonah felt a flutter of hope in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, this horse was something special after all. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Jonah and Ava led Whisper to the open field behind their house. Jonah had mapped out a simple training course using old traffic cones he'd borrowed from his garage. "Okay, girl," he said, patting Whisper's neck. "Let's see what you can do." But Whisper had other ideas. When Jonah tried to guide her toward the starting point, she tossed her head and danced sideways, nearly yanking the lead rope from his hands. A passing truck backfired and Whisper bolted, dragging Jonah several steps before he regained control. "Easy, easy," he shouted, his frustration mounting. "Dad, you're too loud," Ava said softly. "You're scaring her." Throughout the morning, they attempted several practice runs. Whisper showed bursts of incredible speed but refused to follow a consistent path. She'd start strong, then veer off course, distracted by birds or distant sounds. Jonah checked his watch repeatedly, knowing he had 3 cars waiting for repairs at the garage. As the days passed, Jonah's patience wore thin. Every training session meant less time working on cars, and fewer completed jobs meant less income. One afternoon, while trying to replace a transmission, he heard Whisper's nervous whinnying from the paddock. The sound broke his concentration, causing him to drop an expensive part. "That horse is costing me more than she's worth," he muttered, wiping grease from his hands. But Ava never lost faith. Every day after school, she spent hours with Whisper. She brought her school books to the paddock, reading aloud while brushing Whisper's coat until it gleamed. She saved apple slices from her lunch and fed them to Whisper one by one, talking softly the whole time. Slowly, Whisper began to change. She stopped spooking at every unexpected noise. When Ava approached with the lead rope, Whisper would lower her head willingly. During training runs, she started paying more attention to commands, especially when Ava called out encouragement. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jonah and Ava sat on the wooden fence beside the paddock. Whisper grazed peacefully nearby, occasionally lifting her head to check on them. "You're really good with her," Jonah said, watching his daughter's face glow with pride. "She just needed someone to believe in her," Ava replied, swinging her legs. "Like how Mom always believed in us." Jonah's throat tightened at the mention of his late wife. He watched as Whisper approached Ava, gently nuzzling her shoulder. His daughter had grown more confident, more responsible since Whisper's arrival. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "if we're serious about this race, we're going to need proper equipment. A real saddle, bridle, the works." "But Dad, that's expensive." "I'll talk to Mike at the garage. He used to raise horses. Might have some tack we can borrow." Jonah reached over and squeezed Ava's hand. "We've come this far. Might as well do it right." The county fairgrounds buzzed with activity as Jonah pulled their borrowed horse trailer into the parking area. Well-groomed horses pranced around the practice ring, their coats gleaming in the morning sun. Compared to these polished competitors, Whisper looked decidedly amateur, with her mismatched borrowed tack and somewhat scruffy appearance. "Look at all the horses, Dad!" Ava bounced in her seat, her eyes wide with wonder. "They're so beautiful!" Jonah's stomach churned as he watched professional trainers putting their horses through warm-up exercises. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea, he muttered, helping Ava down from the truck. But Whisper surprised them both. Despite the unfamiliar surroundings, she stepped carefully from the trailer, her ears pricked forward with interest. Ava stayed close to her side, speaking softly and offering reassuring pats. "Number 47? A race official approached them with a clipboard. "You're in the third heat, 20 minutes until lineup." As they waited near the track, other competitors cast doubtful glances their way. Whisper's borrowed saddle and Jonah's work jeans stood out among the professional racing gear and pressed jodhpurs. When the call came for their heat, Jonah's hands shook as he led Whisper to the starting gate. The jockey they'd hired, a local teenager named Tommy, looked nervous but determined. "You've got this, Whisper," Ava called from behind the fence. "Show them what you can do." The starting bell rang sharp and clear. Whisper exploded from the gate, her powerful stride matching the seasoned racers beside her. The crowd's chatter turned to gas as she accelerated, moving up through the pack with raw, natural speed. Around the first turn, Whisper was running fourth. By the backstretch, she had moved into third position. As they thundered into the final turn, she drew even with the second-place horse. "Go, Whisper, go!" Ava's voice rang out above the crowd's roar. Whisper surged forward, her ears pinned back with determination. She crossed the finish line a half-length behind the winner, but well ahead of the third-place finisher. The crowd buzzed with excitement as Whisper trotted back to the viewing area, her sides heaving but her head held high. Ava ran to meet them, throwing her arms around Whisper's neck. "Did you see that?" she squealed. "She was amazing!" Before Jonah could respond, a woman in her 50s approached them. She walked with a slight limp but carried herself with unmistakable authority. "That's quite a horse you've got there," she said, studying Whisper with experienced eyes. "I'm Meredith Bennett, used to race professionally." She ran her hand along Whisper's flank, nodding appreciatively. "With proper training, this mare could be something special. I'd be interested in working with her." Jonah tensed, instinctively protective. "We're not looking to sell." "Not asking to buy," Meredith replied. "I'm offering to train her. Professional track work, proper conditioning, the whole package." As Jonah hesitated, Ava pressed close to his side. "Dad," she whispered, her eyes shining, "I know Whisper can be great. I just know it." The morning sun cast long shadows across Meredith's modest training facility as Jonah pulled into the gravel driveway. A few well-maintained paddocks lined the property, and a small oval track wrapped around the back. It wasn't fancy, but everything looked professional and well-organized. "This is so exciting!" Ava pressed her face against the truck window. "Look at all the horses." Jonah gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Remember, we're just here to talk. No promises." Meredith met them by the barn, her keen eyes already assessing Whisper in the trailer. She helped them unload, noting how Whisper pranced nervously on the unfamiliar ground. "Let's see what we're working with," Meredith said, leading them to a round pen. She watched intently as Whisper moved around the pen, occasionally calling out instructions to Jonah. "Good bloodlines show in her movement," she noted, "but she's green as spring grass. No proper ground manners, doesn't respond to basic commands." Jonah's cheeks flushed. "We've only had her a short while." "No judgment." Meredith held up her hands. "But if we're going to do this, you need to understand what you're getting into. Training means early mornings, strict schedules, and absolute dedication. Are you ready for that?" Before Jonah could answer, she continued, "I'll teach you everything. Proper grooming, feeding schedules, exercise routines. But you have to commit fully. No halfway measures." Jonah glanced at Ava's hopeful face and nodded slowly. "We'll do it." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of new information. Meredith showed them proper grooming techniques, but Whisper fidgeted constantly, unused to the thorough attention. When they practiced basic lead rope commands, she either ignored them or pulled against the rope stubbornly. "Patience," Meredith reminded them repeatedly. "She's learning a whole new language." By afternoon, Jonah's head spun with terms like bidding, lunging, and collection. His arms ached from working with the lead rope, and his patience wore thin every time Whisper refused to cooperate. The drive home was quiet, both father and daughter drained from the intense day. Jonah's doubts crept back as he calculated the time and effort this would require. How could he manage this while running his repair business? But when they got home, Ava immediately sat at the kitchen table with her colored pencils. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated on her drawing. Jonah paused behind her, looking at the careful details she added to Whisper's flowing mane, the bright colors of winter's ribbons decorating the scene. "Do you think Whisper will win a real race someday, Dad?" Ava asked without looking up from her artwork. Watching his daughter's dedicated focus, Jonah felt his determination strengthen. Maybe they were in over their heads, but they would face this challenge together. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks as Jonah pulled into Meredith's facility for another day of training. His muscles ached from yesterday's session, and dark circles under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. Beside him, Ava dozed in the passenger seat, her school backpack clutched to her chest. "Rise and shine, sweetie," he said gently. "Time for Whisper's morning routine." But their morning routine was anything but routine. Whisper refused to be caught, trotting away every time Jonah approached with the halter. When he finally managed to lead her to the round pen, she ignored his commands to walk, instead pushing against the lead rope and nearly yanking it from his hands. "She's testing you," Meredith called from the fence. "Stay firm, but calm." Jonah gritted his teeth, fighting to keep his composure. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Whisper would escape her temporary paddock at the facility, sending Jonah on frustrated searches across the property. During training sessions, she'd either ignore commands or do the opposite of what was asked. By the end of the second week, Jonah was at his wit's end. "I don't understand," he confessed to Meredith. "We're getting nowhere." Meredith leaned against the fence post, studying him carefully. "When was the last time you just spent time with her? No training, no expectations?" Jonah blinked. I'm not sure. Take her to the back field. Let her graze. Just be with her." Though skeptical, Jonah followed Meredith's advice that afternoon. He led Whisper to the quiet field behind the training facility and dropped the lead rope, letting her wander freely while he sat in the grass. The silence felt awkward at first, but as the minutes passed, Jonah found himself talking softly to Whisper about everything and nothing. His worries about bills, his hopes for Ava's future, his fears of failing them both. Whisper lifted her head occasionally, ears turning toward his voice. She grazed closer and closer until she stood near enough for Jonah to feel her warmth. For the first time, he noticed the intelligent gleam in her eyes, the gentle way she moved around him. The next day's training session showed subtle but meaningful changes. Whisper still had her moments of stubbornness, but she began responding to Jonah's voice commands more consistently. She allowed him to lead her without pulling and showed more focus during their exercises. By week's end, Meredith suggested they try a lap around the training track. Jonah's stomach churned with nervous energy as he guided Whisper to the starting position. Ava watched from the rail, holding her breath. To everyone's amazement, Whisper responded perfectly to every cue. She maintained her pace, took the turn smoothly, and finished the lap with powerful strides. Ava's excited cheers echoed across the track as Jonah patted Whisper's neck, his chest swelling with pride. Even Meredith's usual stern expression softened into a smile. "Now that's what I call progress," she said, nodding approvingly at both horse and rider. Word of Whisper's flawless performance at Meredith's facility spread quickly through the local racing community. At the corner cafe where horse people gathered, conversations buzzed about the scrappy foal who'd placed second in her first amateur race. But not everyone celebrated her success. Marcus Sterling, owner of Thunderbolt Stables, sat in his leather office chair, scowling at a video of Whisper's recent training session. His prized horse, Thunderbolt, had never been beaten until that amateur race. He picked up his phone, making quiet calls about Whisper's mysterious appearance and questionable background. Within days, whispers of a different kind rippled through the community. "Did you hear about that horse's father?" people murmured. "Caught doping. The whole bloodline's tainted." The rumors reached Jonah during a supply run to the feed store. Two men stopped talking when he walked in, their eyes following him down the aisle. His chest tightened as he heard them snicker behind his back. One morning, Jonah noticed something was off about Whisper. Her usual bright eyes looked dull, and her coat had lost its shine. When he led her to the training track, she dragged her feet, nothing like her usual spirited self. "Something's wrong," he told Meredith, who immediately went to check the feed room. She emerged holding a handful of grain, her face grim. "This has been tampered with," she said, showing him the odd discoloration. "Someone's been adding something to her feed." Jonah's blood ran cold. He knew exactly who would benefit from Whisper falling ill. That afternoon, he drove to Thunderbolt Stables, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Marcus Sterling met him in the stable yard, surrounded by his expensive horses. "Mr. Harris," he said smoothly, "what brings you to my humble establishment?" "Cut the act," Jonah snapped. "I know you've been messing with Whisper's feed." Sterling's smile never wavered. "That's quite an accusation. Do you have proof?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Take some friendly advice. Racing isn't for amateurs. Pack up your miracle horse and go back to fixing cars, before someone gets hurt." Jonah returned to Meredith's facility, shaking with anger. He immediately replaced all of Whisper's feed and installed heavy-duty locks on the feed room door. That evening, he sat with Meredith, drawing up a new security plan. "I'll handle her feed personally," he declared, testing the new padlock. "Morning and night. No one else touches it." He looked through the paddock fence at Whisper, already recovering her strength with the clean feed. Sterling's threat had only strengthened his resolve. No one would stop Whisper from reaching her potential, not if he had anything to say about it. The stack of unpaid bills on Jonah's kitchen counter grew higher each day. He stared at them, calculator in hand, trying to make the numbers work. Between Whisper's training fees, feed costs, and basic living expenses, his savings had dwindled to almost nothing. The phone rang constantly with clients asking about their delayed car repairs, but Jonah could barely find time between training sessions to work on them. A truck's familiar rumble made him look up from the bills. Through the window, he saw his Uncle Roy's beaten-up pickup pulling into the driveway. His stomach knotted as Roy stepped out, looking more weathered than ever. "Well, well," Roy called out as Jonah met him on the porch. "Looks like my gift turned out to be worth something after all." Jonah crossed his arms. "What do you want, Roy?" "Just what's fair," Roy said, his friendly tone hardening. "I hear Whisper's making quite a name for herself. Seems only right I get a cut of the winnings, seeing as I'm the one who gave her to you." "She hasn't won anything yet," Jonah snapped. "And you dumped her here because you couldn't handle her yourself." Roy's face reddened. "That's gratitude for you. I gave you a champion bloodline horse, and this is how you treat family." "Family?" Jonah's voice rose. "Where were you when Mom died? When I needed help raising Ava?" Their argument escalated, echoing through the house. Neither man noticed Ava appearing in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "You're just like your father," Roy spat. "Too proud to admit when you need help. Too stubborn to—" "Dad?" Ava's small voice cut through their shouting. Tears streamed down her face as she turned and ran toward Whisper's paddock. "Ava, wait!" Jonah called after her, shooting Roy a furious glance before following his daughter. He found her with her arms wrapped around Whisper's neck, her shoulders shaking. The horse nuzzled her gently, as if sensing her distress. "I'm sorry you had to hear that, sweetheart," Jonah said softly, approaching them. He placed a hand on Ava's shoulder. "Everything's going to be okay." "Are we going to lose, Whisper?" Ava asked between sobs. "No," Jonah said firmly. "Whisper's part of our family now. Nobody's taking her away." Later that night, after Roy had left and Ava was asleep, Jonah sat at his desk with a fresh piece of paper. He began writing out a plan, listing his clients, calculating what he could charge, and scheduling repair work around Whisper's training. Next to the paper, he placed a formal letter cutting ties with Roy, making it clear that Whisper belonged solely to him and Ava. As he worked, he could hear Whisper moving around in her paddock. The sound was no longer an irritation, but a comfort, reminding him of how far they'd come together. He thought about Ava's smile during training sessions, about Whisper's growing trust in him, about the small family they'd become. The morning sun cast long shadows across the paddock as Jonah implemented Meredith's new training routine. Instead of rushing straight into speed drills, he started with gentle groundwork exercises, letting Whisper adjust to his presence. "Come on, sweetie," he called softly, leading Whisper in a circle. The mare's ears pricked forward, her steps becoming more confident with each round. Ava sat on the fence, swinging her legs. "Can I help, Dad?" Jonah smiled. "Actually, Meredith suggested we make this more of a family effort." He waved her over. "Want to learn how to guide her through the figure-8 pattern?" Ava's face lit up as she hopped down. Jonah showed her how to hold the lead rope properly, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Whisper responded immediately to Ava's gentle touch, following her with surprising eagerness. "Look, Dad, she's doing it!" Ava beamed as Whisper executed a perfect turn. Throughout the morning, they worked together, with Jonah incorporating Ava into various exercises. When it came time for speed work, Whisper showed new focus. Her starts were cleaner, her rhythm more consistent. During their water break, Meredith approached, nodding approvingly. "She's settling in nicely. The family approach is working wonders." Suddenly, a truck backfired on the nearby road. Whisper startled, tossing her head nervously. Before Jonah could react, Ava was already at Whisper's side, speaking softly and stroking her neck. The mare's anxiety melted away under Ava's touch. "Well, would you look at that?" Meredith said, impressed. "Your daughter's got quite the gift with her." They watched as Ava continued to work with Whisper, the horse responding to her commands with remarkable patience. Even during the more challenging exercises, Whisper remained calm when Ava was nearby. "There's a prep race next weekend at Carson's track," Meredith mentioned. "Nothing major, but it would be good experience for both of you. Whisper's ready for it." Jonah observed his daughter and Whisper working in perfect harmony. "What do you think, Ava? Should we give it a shot?" "Yes," Ava squealed, hugging Whisper's neck. The horse nickered softly in response. As the sun began to set, Jonah watched Ava leading Whisper back to her paddock. The mare walked beside her with gentle steps, carefully matching the girl's pace. Their shadows stretched long across the ground, merged into one shape in the golden light. Something warm spread through Jonah's chest as he realized how much their lives had changed since Whisper arrived. What had started as an unwanted responsibility had transformed into something precious, a bond that made them stronger together. The morning air buzzed with activity at Carson's track as Jonah pulled up with the horse trailer. Unlike the casual atmosphere of the amateur race, this venue hummed with professional energy. Sleek horses pranced past them, their coats gleaming in the early light. Trainers called out instructions, and jockeys in colorful silks hurried between stalls. Whisper shifted nervously in her trailer, her ears flicking back and forth at the unfamiliar sounds. When Jonah opened the door, she backed out cautiously, her eyes wide. "It's okay, girl," Ava whispered, reaching up to stroke Whisper's neck. The horse lowered her head toward the girl, drawing comfort from her presence. Meredith met them at the preparation area, helping Jonah get Whisper ready. "Remember what we practiced," she said, adjusting the saddle. "She might be nervous, but her training will kick in." When the call came for the horses to line up, Jonah's hands trembled slightly as he led Whisper to the starting gate. The other horses looked magnificent, their muscles rippling beneath glossy coats. Whisper seemed small in comparison, but her eyes were bright and alert. The start was rough. Whisper stumbled coming out of the gate, losing precious ground. Jonah's heart sank, but then something remarkable happened. Whisper found her rhythm, her powerful legs eating up the distance. One by one, she passed the other horses until she was running with the leading pack. The crowd's cheering grew louder as Whisper held her position, matching stride for stride with horses that had far more racing experience. In the final stretch, she surged forward, crossing the finish line in third place. Ava jumped up and down, clapping wildly. "She did it, Dad! She really did it!" Pride swelled in Jonah's chest as he collected Whisper, her coat dark with sweat, but her head held high. Even Meredith looked pleased, patting Whisper's flank appreciatively. As they prepared to load Whisper into the trailer for the journey home, voices drifted over from nearby. "That's the one with the questionable bloodline," a trainer muttered to his colleague. "Shame about her sire's scandal. Makes you wonder." "Heard she was rescued from some backyard operation," another added. "Lucky if she makes it in any serious races." Jonah's jaw tightened as he secured the trailer door, but he kept working, focusing on Whisper's needs rather than the gossip. "Don't listen to them," Ava said fiercely, standing on her tiptoes to give Whisper a carrot through the trailer window. "You were amazing today. Just wait until next time." Whisper munched contentedly on her treat, seemingly unbothered by the murmuring around her. Looking at his daughter's unwavering faith and his horse's quiet dignity, Jonah straightened his shoulders. They would prove the doubters wrong, one race at a time. The morning sun cast long shadows across the paddock as Jonah made his daily rounds. He checked Whisper's water, filled her feed bucket, and was about to head back when something caught his eye. A piece of paper stuck to the fence post. His stomach tightened as he unfolded it. "Drop out now or face the consequences. Some horses aren't meant for racing." The paper crumpled in his fist. There was only one person who'd been openly hostile about Whisper's participation in races: Thomas Sterling, owner of Thunderbolt Stables. The same man who'd been spreading rumors about Whisper's bloodline. Later that day, at a local equestrian event, Jonah spotted Sterling near the practice ring. The wealthy owner stood watching riders warm up, looking perfectly composed in his expensive riding clothes. "We need to talk," Jonah said, approaching him directly. Sterling turned, his expression neutral. "Mr. Harris, what can I do for you?" "You can start by explaining this." Jonah thrust the crumpled note forward. "Found it on my property this morning." "I have no idea what you're talking about." Sterling's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I understand your concern, it must be difficult trying to build a racing career on such questionable foundation." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Simply that horses with controversial bloodlines tend to attract attention, not all of it positive. Perhaps someone's trying to protect the integrity of the sport." Sterling's voice dripped with false sympathy. "After all, We wouldn't want another scandal, would we? Jonah's hands shook with anger. Stay away from my horse! Or what? Sterling's facade cracked slightly. Face it, Harris. You're out of your depth. That horse will always be tainted by her past. Save yourself the trouble and walk away now. Back home that evening, Jonah worked with grim determination. He installed new padlocks on the feed shed and reinforced the paddock gate. Meredith arrived to help, bringing motion sensor lights to mount around the property. We'll set up cameras next, she said, helping him secure the last lock. No one's going to get near her without us knowing. Ava watched from the fence, her face worried but determined. Dad, are you scared? Jonah paused in his work. A little, sweetheart. But being scared doesn't mean we're giving up. Good, Ava said firmly, because we've worked too hard to stop now, and Whisper needs us. Looking at his daughter's resolute expression, Jonah felt his determination strengthen. Whisper nickered softly from her paddock, as if adding her agreement. They had come too far to let threats and intimidation stop them now. You're right, he told Ava, pulling her into a hug. We're not backing down. The early morning mist hung low over the training track as Meredith paced back and forth, explaining her new strategy to Jonah. Whisper's got the speed and stamina, but those first crucial seconds out of the gate are killing us. She pointed to the starting gates where Whisper waited patiently. We need to work on her explosive power. Quick starts, short bursts, building that initial acceleration. Jonah nodded, taking notes in a small notebook he'd started carrying. The days of viewing Whisper as just another burden felt distant now. What's the plan? We'll do sprint intervals, 20 yards at first, focusing on her burst from a standstill. Then we'll gradually increase the distance. For hours, they worked with Whisper, running her through short sprints and practicing clean starts from the gate. Jonah's voice grew hoarse from calling encouragement, and his legs ached from jogging alongside the track, but he didn't mind. Each time Whisper responded to his commands, each improvement in her starting speed felt like a personal victory. As the sun climbed higher, Ava arrived after school, clutching her homework and a new stopwatch Meredith had given her. Can I help? She asked eagerly. Perfect timing, Meredith said. We need someone to time Whisper's starts. Think you can handle that? Ava's face lit up as she took her position by the track. She proved to be a natural timekeeper, carefully recording each of Whisper's runs in a notebook decorated with horse stickers. Between sprints, she read the times out loud, beaming with pride when the numbers showed improvement. Whisper seemed to respond to their collective enthusiasm. Her starts became sharper, more focused. Where she once hesitated at the gate, she now burst forward with newfound confidence. During one particularly impressive run, she exploded from the starting position with such power that both Meredith and Jonah exchanged shocked looks. Now that, Meredith said, is what we've been waiting for. As the afternoon wound down, they gathered by Whisper's paddock. The horse grazed contentedly nearby, while they sat on wooden fence rails, sharing a thermos of coffee and discussing the upcoming regional competition. If she runs like she did today, Meredith said, we've got a real shot. You really think so? Jonah asked, watching Whisper with pride. She's ready, Ava declared with absolute certainty, still clutching her stopwatch. We all are. Jonah looked around at their small group, Meredith with her years of experience and unwavering dedication, Ava with her boundless optimism, and Whisper, who had somehow transformed from an unwanted responsibility into the heart of their makeshift family. For the first time since his wife's passing, he felt truly connected to something larger than his daily struggles. Here, in this moment, he wasn't just surviving, he was part of something meaningful. The week before the regional competition felt like a pressure cooker ready to burst. Jonah's desk overflowed with paperwork, transport permits, registration forms, and vet certificates. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from the competition organizers and last-minute arrangements. In Whisper's paddock, he triple-checked her feed portions and scrutinized every detail of her appearance. "Her coat doesn't look quite right," he muttered, running his hand along her flank for the 10th time that morning. "Dad, she looks beautiful," Ava said, holding a brush. "You checked her coat an hour ago." "We can't take any chances." His voice came out sharper than intended. "This isn't just playing around anymore, Ava. This is serious." Ava's face fell. "I know it's serious. I've been helping every day." "Well, maybe you should focus more on your homework instead. Your math teacher called yesterday about a missing assignment." "But I want to help with Whisper." Tears welled up in Ava's eyes. Just go inside, okay? I need to concentrate." Meredith, who had been watching from the fence, stepped forward. "Jonah, a word." She led him away from the paddock. "You're losing sight of what matters here." "What matters is making sure everything's perfect for next week." "What matters," Meredith corrected, "is the connection you've built with that horse and your daughter. That's what's gotten you this far." Ava approached them hesitantly, wiping her eyes. "Dad, maybe we could just spend time with Whisper tonight. No training, no checking things. Just us." Jonah looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at the stack of papers waiting inside. Meredith nodded encouragingly. "You know what? You're right." He took a deep breath. "Let's have a quiet evening with Whisper." As the sun began to set, they gathered in the paddock. Ava showed Jonah her special technique for brushing Whisper's mane, while he shared stories about the first time he tried to lead her on a rope. They took turns feeding Whisper carrots and apples, laughing at her eager lips searching their pockets for more treats. The tension in Jonah's shoulders gradually melted away as they worked together, caring for Whisper in the peaceful evening air. The paperwork and preparations could wait. This moment felt more important. As they finished up for the night, Whisper pressed her soft muzzle against Jonah's chest, her warm breath gentle and steady. He stroked her neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath. And in that quiet moment, he made a silent promise to both his horse and his daughter. Whatever happened at the regional competition, he would give it everything he had, not for the glory or the money, but for the family they had become. The evening before the regional competition, Jonah's garage looked like a sporting goods store had exploded inside it. Racing tack, grooming supplies, and first aid materials covered every surface as he methodically checked each item off his list. "Brushes, hoof pick, liniment," Jonah muttered, sorting through the supplies. "Don't forget her lucky ribbon." Ava bounced on her toes, holding up the blue ribbon from their first amateur race. Her excitement filled the cramped space as she darted between boxes, double-checking everything with eager eyes. "Ava, please be careful around those boxes," Jonah said, his shoulders tight with tension. He recounted the feed portions for the third time, worried he'd forget something crucial. Dark clouds rolled in as they finished packing, and the first rumble of thunder made them both look up. Through the garage window, they saw Whisper pacing in her paddock, her tail swishing nervously. "She doesn't like storms," Ava said, pressing her face against the glass as rain began to fall. Another crack of thunder boomed overhead, and Whisper reared up, whinnying in distress. Jonah's heart jumped into his throat. If she hurt herself now? "We need to calm her down," he said, already grabbing rain jackets. They rushed out into the downpour, rain pelting their faces as they approached the paddock. Whisper cantered in circles, her hooves churning up mud. Her eyes rolled white with fear at each lightning flash. "Easy, girl," Jonah called, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. He remembered Meredith's lessons about maintaining calm energy around nervous horses. Ava slipped under the fence before Jonah could stop her. "Whisper, it's okay," she said softly, the way she always did during training when Whisper got spooked. Together, they approached the frightened horse. Ava hummed a quiet tune, while Jonah spoke in low, soothing tones. Gradually, Whisper's circles grew smaller, her steps less frantic. When they finally got close enough, Ava reached out and stroked Whisper's neck. The horse's breathing slowed, and she lowered her head to nuzzle Ava's shoulder. "That's our girl," Jonah said, relief flooding through him. They'd handled the situation perfectly, using everything they'd learned over the past months. Later that night, after they'd dried off and changed into warm clothes, Jonah tucked Ava into bed. Her eyes were heavy with sleep, but she still smiled. "We did good with Whisper tonight, didn't we, Dad?" "We sure did, sweetheart." He pulled the blanket up to her chin. From her window, he could see Whisper's dark shape in the paddock, calm and peaceful now under the clearing sky. The sight of her steady silhouette against the starlit night filled him with determination. Standing there, watching over both his daughter and their horse, Jonah felt ready for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. The morning sun painted the racetrack in golden light as Jonah pulled their trailer into the crowded parking area, carefully navigating between the rows of vehicles. This wasn't like the small local events they'd attended before. Professional trailers and expensive equipment filled the grounds, and well-dressed spectators were already claiming their seats in the grandstand. The air buzzed with excitement and the distant sound of announcements over the crackling speakers. Ava bounced in her seat, pressing her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "Look at all the people!" Her eyes sparkled with wonder at the bustling scene before them. Meredith met them at the designated stall, her expression serious as she adjusted her worn baseball cap. "Remember what we practiced. Keep her calm and focused. This is a whole different level of competition." Jonah's hands shook slightly as he unloaded Whisper, the trailer's ramp creaking under their weight. The mare's coat gleamed from their early morning grooming, but she tensed at the unfamiliar surroundings, nostrils flaring at the strange scents. Other horses pranced nearby, their handlers watching Whisper, with barely concealed skepticism, whispering among themselves about the unknown entry. "Deep breaths," Meredith reminded him as they walked Whisper to the track, her boots crunching on the gravel path. "She feeds off your energy. Stay centered." When the horses lined up at the starting gate, Jonah's heart hammered in his chest so hard he could feel it in his throat. Whisper shifted nervously, her ears flicking back and forth at the tension-filled atmosphere. The bell rang with a sharp clang, and the gates flew open with a metallic crash. Whisper stumbled, losing precious ground as the other horses surged ahead, their hooves thundering against the dirt track. Jonah's stomach dropped as he watched her fall to the back of the pack, his hopes sinking with each passing second. "Come on, Whisper!" Ava's voice cut through the crowd's roar, clear and strong. "You can do it! Run like the wind!" Something in Whisper seemed to ignite at the sound of Ava's voice. She found her stride and began to accelerate, eating up the distance between her and the leaders, her powerful muscles bunching and stretching with each stride. Around the final turn, she was flying, her powerful legs carrying her past horse after horse, sending dirt clods flying in her wake. The crowd rose to their feet as Whisper charged down the home stretch, their cheers growing louder with each passing second. She crossed the finish line in second place, just a length behind the winner, her chest heaving with effort. The stands erupted in cheers, and cameras flashed from every direction. After the ceremony, several well-dressed men approached Jonah with business cards and talk of sponsorships, their expensive cologne mixing with the track's earthy scents. Their words blurred together. Training facilities, marketing deals, racing circuits. Each offer sounded better than the last. "Think about it, Mr. Harris," one said, his gold watch glinting in the sunlight. "Your horse has real potential. We could make her a star. Put her name in lights." Meredith pulled him aside, her voice low and urgent. "Be careful, Jonah. Some of these offers aren't what they seem. I've seen too many good horses ruined by rushing into the wrong deal." "But Dad," Ava tugged at his sleeve, her eyes shining with dreams of glory. "Think what Whisper could do with real training facilities. She could win everything. We could go to the biggest races." Jonah looked between the eager sponsors, their practiced smiles never reaching their eyes, Meredith's cautious frown, and Ava's hopeful face, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a physical burden. The future of their small family hung in the balance. As the excitement from the race began to settle, Jonah walked to Whisper's stall to check her equipment. Something had felt off during the race, particularly at the start. His hands moved over the leather straps, checking each buckle with practiced care. His fingers stopped at the girth strap. It was looser than he remembered, and the worn leather showed fresh scratch marks. "Meredith," he called, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can you look at this?" Meredith hurried over, her experienced eyes scanning the tack. She ran her fingers along the suspicious marks, her expression darkening. This was deliberately loosened. See these scratches? Someone tampered with it before the race. If this had come completely undone... She shook her head, not needing to finish the thought. Jonah's jaw clenched as he remembered seeing the rival owner, Maxwell Thompson, lurking near their stall earlier. Without a word, he strode toward the stable area where Thompson's horses were kept, Meredith following close behind. They found Thompson directing his stable hands, a satisfied smirk on his face despite his horse's win being under review. Jonah approached him, anger burning in his chest. "You couldn't stand the thought of losing fair and square, could you?" Jonah's voice carried through the stable, drawing attention from nearby handlers and officials. Thompson's smile didn't waver. "I don't know what you're talking about, Harris." "The sabotage tack. You were the only one near our stall this morning, checking out the competition." Jonah stepped closer. "Trying to get Whisper hurt or worse?" Thompson's composure slipped for just a moment. "Well, maybe if you secured your equipment properly, like a real trainer would." He caught himself, but it was too late. "How did you know the equipment wasn't secured properly?" Meredith asked sharply. "Nobody mentioned anything about loose straps." Several observers had gathered now, including 2 race officials who exchanged meaningful looks. Thompson's face reddened as he realized his mistake. "I want to file a formal complaint," Jonah announced to the officials, "and I have witnesses who heard everything." As the officials led Thompson away for questioning, a track veterinarian approached with urgent news. The mandatory drug test on Thompson's horse had come back positive for performance enhancers. The suspension was immediate and decisive. Jonah returned to Whisper's stall where Ava was brushing the mare's coat. The official results were updated. Whisper's second-place finish stood, now untainted by doubt or scandal. More importantly, her performance had been honest and true, just like her heart. "You did it, girl," Jonah whispered, patting Whisper's neck. "You showed them all what you're made of." Jonah sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by a stack of letters and contracts from various racing organizations and companies. Each envelope promised something bigger than the last: substantial sponsorship deals, equipment endorsements, and guaranteed spots in prestigious races. Ava peered over his shoulder, her eyes widening at the colorful logos and official letterheads. "Look at this one, Dad. They want Whisper to be on their feed bags." Ava pointed excitedly at a glossy proposal. "And this company wants to make toy horses that look just like her." Jonah rubbed his tired eyes. The money being offered could solve their financial problems overnight. but something about it felt wrong. He glanced out the window at Whisper grazing peacefully in her paddock, unaware of the decisions being made about her future. The next day, Jonah met with 3 different sponsorship representatives. Each meeting left him more uneasy than the last. The first company wanted complete control over Whisper's training schedule. The second insisted on relocating her to their facility. The third demanded exclusive rights to her image and racing career. "It's standard procedure," one representative explained smoothly. "We're making a significant investment after all." During afternoon training, Meredith noticed Jonah's distraction. "Those vultures been circling?" she asked, watching Whisper cool down after her workout. "They're offering more money than I've ever seen," Jonah admitted. "But they want to change everything. Her training, where she lives, who handles her." Meredith's expression hardened. "I've seen it before. They'll turn her into a product, squeeze every dollar they can out of her. The moment she stops performing exactly how they want, they'll drop her." That evening, Ava sat cross-legged by Whisper's paddock, sketching in her notebook. "Dad," she called as Jonah approached. "Remember when Whisper first came to us? She was scared and didn't trust anyone. But we helped her believe in herself." Jonah nodded, leaning against the fence. "These companies don't know her like we do," Ava continued. "They don't know how she likes her ears scratched, or how she runs fastest when you tell her she's brave. They just want to make her famous." Looking at his daughter's earnest face and Whisper's gentle eyes, Jonah made his decision. He gathered all the sponsorship offers and dropped them in his office recycling bin. Instead, he picked up the phone and called the local feed store owner who had always given them fair prices. Then he contacted the community newspaper that had covered Whisper's first race. "We'll find another way to get to nationals," he told Ava. "One that lets Whisper stay Whisper." The local community center buzzed with activity as Jonah and Ava set up posters featuring Whisper's journey. Photos showed her transformation from a scrawny, untamed foal to the sleek racing horse she'd become. Ava had carefully written captions for each image, highlighting their struggles and victories. "Step right up and meet our local champion," Ava called out to passing families. Her enthusiasm was contagious, drawing curious onlookers to their booth. Jonah organized training demonstrations at the local track, where Whisper showed off her impressive speed. Children lined up to pet her, while their parents listened to Ava's animated stories about Whisper's escapes and triumphs. Local business owners, impressed by the turnout, approached Jonah with modest sponsorship offers. "We remember when she used to run through our fields," laughed Mr. Peterson, the neighbor who'd once been furious about Whisper's crop damage. He wrote out a check, adding, "She's brought something special to this town." Other neighbors joined in, contributing what they could. The local feed store offered discounted supplies, while the hardware store donated materials to build better training equipment. The community newspaper ran weekly updates on their fundraising progress, dubbing Whisper the people's champion. One morning, as Jonah tallied their donations, a familiar truck pulled into the driveway. Uncle Roy stepped out, looking older and more subdued than during his last visit. "I saw the article about Whisper," Roy said, shuffling his feet. "I was wrong about you, Jonah. You've done right by her." He pulled out an envelope. "It's not much, but I want to help get her to nationals." Jonah stared at the envelope, then at his uncle's weathered face. Years of hurt and misunderstanding hung between them. "Would you like to see her?" he finally asked. Roy's eyes brightened. "I'd like that very much." As uncle and nephew walked to the paddock together, sharing stories and mending old wounds, Ava watched from the porch with a satisfied smile. That evening, Meredith joined them for a small celebration in the backyard. They had reached their fundraising goal, and Whisper was running better than ever. Jonah watched Ava showing Roy her collection of newspaper clippings about Whisper, while Meredith discussed training strategies with some local supporters. "I never thought we'd get here," Jonah admitted, patting Whisper's neck. "But we didn't just find a way to nationals. We found our place in this community." The morning sun cast long shadows across the national racetrack as Jonah brushed Whisper's coat until it gleamed. His hands trembled slightly, betraying his nerves despite his calm expression. Around them, professional trainers and their sleek horses moved with practiced precision, making their modest setup seem out of place. Ava darted between the stalls, her eyes wide with excitement. "Look at all the cameras, Dad!" she exclaimed, pointing to the media crews setting up their equipment. Meredith appeared with Whisper's racing gear, her expression stern but encouraging. "Remember what we practiced," she said, helping Jonah prepare Whisper. "She's ready for this." As they led Whisper to the track, the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Spectators pointed and whispered, recognizing the unlikely contender they'd read about in the papers. Whisper's ears twitched at the noise, but she remained steady under Jonah's gentle guidance. The starting gates loomed before them, imposing and final. Jonah's heart pounded as he watched Whisper being loaded in. The other horses stamped and snorted, their coats glossy under the bright stadium lights. The bell rang. The gates flew open. Whisper stumbled slightly, losing precious ground as the other horses surged ahead. Jonah's stomach dropped as he watched the pack pull away, leaving Whisper struggling to find her footing. "Come on, Whisper!" Ava's voice rang out clear and strong above the crowd. "You can do it!" Something in Whisper seemed to respond to Ava's faith. Her stride lengthened, her powerful legs eating up the distance. One by one, she began passing the trailing horses. The crowd's roar grew as Whisper advanced through the pack. At the final turn, she was running fourth, then surged forward with breathtaking speed. The front runners came into view as Whisper gave everything she had. In a heart-stopping finish, Whisper crossed the line in third place, just a length behind the winner. The stadium erupted in cheers, celebrating the underdog who had proved she belonged. Reporters swarmed around them as they led Whisper back to the winner's circle. Microphones appeared in front of Jonah's face as cameras flashed. "How does it feel to take third at Nationals with a horse nobody believed in?" someone called out. Before Jonah could answer, Ava wrapped her arms around Whisper's neck. "She's always been a champion to us," she declared proudly, her voice carrying to the gathered crowd. "She just needed a chance to show everyone else." Jonah watched his daughter with Whisper, his chest tight with emotion. They hadn't won first place, but seeing them together, surrounded by admirers and well-wishers, he knew they'd achieved something far more valuable than a simple victory. The evening air was sweet with the scent of fresh hay as neighbors gathered at Jonah's farm. Folding chairs dotted the grass, and laughter mixed with the gentle nickering of horses. Paper lanterns strung between fence posts cast a warm glow over the impromptu celebration. Whisper pranced in her paddock, her coat gleaming in the fading light. She seemed to know she was the guest of honor, tossing her head proudly whenever someone pointed her way. Ava moved through the crowd, retelling the race story to anyone who would listen, her eyes bright with excitement. "You've got something special here," Meredith said, joining Jonah by the fence. She gestured to the property around them. "Yeah, this place has potential. With the right training program, we could help other underdogs find their way." Jonah nodded, watching as his daughter fed Whisper a carrot. "I never thought I'd say this, but I can't imagine doing anything else now." He pulled out a business card from his pocket. "The Racing Magazine called today. They want me to write about Whisper's story." "You should do it," Meredith said. "People need to hear about second chances." Later that evening, after the neighbors had gone home, Jonah sat at his kitchen table with a blank notebook. Words flowed easily as he described their journey, the early morning training sessions, Ava's unwavering faith, the community's support. He wrote about fear and doubt, about learning to trust, and about the unexpected ways hope could change a person's life. Looking up from his writing, Jonah caught sight of Ava and Whisper through the window. They were playing their favorite game in the field, with Ava running alongside the fence, while Whisper matched her pace. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the grass. Whisper broke into a gallop, her mane flowing in the wind. She moved with pure joy, each stride a celebration of freedom and strength. Ava's laughter carried across the field, clear and happy. Jonah stepped onto the porch, leaning against the railing. The sight before him filled his heart with quiet contentment. Whisper hadn't just given them trophies or recognition. She'd given them something far more precious. In her paddock, she was more than just a racehorse. She was the force that had brought his family together, had given him purpose, had taught him to believe again. A smile spread across his face as he watched his daughter and their remarkable horse share this peaceful moment in the golden evening light. If you enjoyed the story of Jonah and Whisper, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.